talk about all things parenting. And today we're talking with Teran Tadal, the Director of Equity and Inclusion at the Wharton Undergrad Division at the University of Pennsylvania. And we're talking about how to talk to kids about racial identity and bias. Teran, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
So before we get into this, can you give some basics around vocabulary, race versus identity versus ethnicity?
Yes. So you can get really bogged down in some of these terms, and my
Yeah.
goal and my hope is that people won't. I think about race as the social construction of who people see or what people see. And so it's based on perceived physical traits, essentially. So to give it just a really basic baseline, it's what we see in others.
Okay.
It's the difference that we see in others. When it comes to identity, it's more about how we perceive our place in the world. And so we're going to have multiple identities, right? Some of them might be projected onto us in terms of between gender, what somebody might do if they are leaning more towards the female spectrum, or what someone might do if they're leaning towards more of the male spectrum. But more or less, identity is us finding our place in the world and figuring out what gives us confidence, what gives us energy, what helps us feel part of a community. And it could be multiple communities.
So how we identify,
How we identify. Correct.
regardless of what someone else sees outside.
Correct. Yep. How we see
Okay.
ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Where race is how someone else sees us.
Correct. That's something that's
Okay.
been projected onto us by society.
Okay. And then what about ethnicity?
Oh, ethnicity is I get excited about it because it's, to me, it's culture, right? So what are some of the traditions that your family does? What makes you part of a larger network, a
Mm,
living, breathing part of a community, right? So your ethnicity might be linked, it might be linked to a country, but it could also be linked to religion. It could be linked to the music or the traditions that you might have, or be, usually it's part of a larger community, right? So an example would be that my mother is from Jamaica, and knowing that both music and food especially, love is food, right, in our community. And I think that does translate to lots of different
yeah.
cultures. But you might not hear I love you as much, but you know the food is coming, right? And so when you meet other people from the Jamaican diaspora, you're saying, oh my gosh, such and such gave you this type of food. And it's like you just automatically know. You have an understanding between one another of like, oh,
Right.
that's love, right? No one had to say
Right.
it, but I gave you this food item, or like, you came over to dinner at my house, and that's love, right? That's how it's expressed. So ethnicity is more about the culture that you surround yourself with. Usually it's not projected onto you, but something your family brings to the table. And that could also help to inform your identity.
Okay. All right. So race. So I look at you, I see Black woman. Is that
Mhm.
race? Okay.
That's race. Yep.
That's race.
Hmm.
What you identify as might be different.
Correct. Right. Something that I might check on the box for a census, an application, something like
Okay.
that might be, you might be thinking, oh, African American. And actually, I check Black and African American if
Okay.
that's there. But that's more about how I identify my heritage, thinking about my ethnicity, and maybe getting a little technical, but breaking
Yeah.
down the social construct a little bit more for
Okay.
myself.
And then ethnicity, you talked about like Jamaican and like all of that, like that might be how you that's your ethnicity. That's
The ethnicity, right, is going to be
okay.
linked to your culture, to the country of origin sometimes. And again, it could also be religion. There might be certain traditions that you have from your religious background
Okay.
that just make a lot of sense,
Like
right? So,
Jewish.
like Jewish, it
Okay.
could be you're Buddhist and you have a temple in your house, and that's just standard, and
Mm-hmm.
your whole family has, a small temple. I'm saying temple, I'm sorry, altar, a small altar in your
Altar.
home.
Hmm.
Right, altar. Yes,
Okay.
I'm Catholic, right? So like doing some of the rites of passage through the religious community as a Catholic person, you know that First Communion's coming, First Reconciliation, those sort of rites
Okay.
are coming. So yeah, that could be linked to your ethnicity.
Okay, thank you for fleshing that out. Okay, so now
Sure.
when it comes to parenting, when it comes to our children,
Mhm.
why and how? The how's a big one, but why should we start talking about racial identity?
I believe that it's something that should be done early and often, and it's because we've been through multiple generations, right? And I think we as parents, we have a obligation to help the next generation sort this out, right? We didn't necessarily build the social construct. We didn't build race and who's ranked where. And I will say within, and I know other scholars have said this too, within the US, we're talking about a caste system and it's based
Mhm.
on color, right? And your proximity to particular colors. And I feel like for our children, talking about race is not a bad thing. I don't think it's going to alter their perception in a negative way. For me, it feels like it's going to promote understanding and empathy on a completely different level than, and they can receive that empathy, right? We're teaching them those things anyway, but being able to understand difference and actually see it as a good thing, learning to navigate this world. I feel like it's getting smaller and smaller. You add more
Yeah,
technology. Our children are talking about different continents, and we have a debate in our house about why it's Oceania instead of, and I'm sure I'm saying it incorrectly, Oceania, instead of just Australia, right? As like the continent. But to me, it makes sense because it's including more areas. It's including New
right.
Zealand and the other Polynesian islands that surround that continent. And so it's just those small tweaks that are helping them to understand our world in a completely different way. And I just feel like if ever we're going to make a change or at least challenge
Yeah.
societal norms, this is a way to do it with speaking with your children about race and about ethnicity and identity and helping them to understand and feel confident in those conversations about difference.
So when you talk about speaking to a child, can we break it down into age group? Like really, like how do you introduce it and when do you start introducing it? And then how do
Yeah.
the conversations get deeper over time?
Yeah, you definitely have to use age appropriate verbiage with your child. So when they're really, really little, so studies are showing that between 6 months and a year, students, oh, I'm saying students, sorry, but children are really, this is, you see where my mind is. Um, Children are recognizing, so they can
Six
recognize
months to a year?
6 months to a
Okay.
year.
Mhm.
Technically, they say up to Embrace Race is a website that I think is amazing. And they actually show a chart of at 3 months, they're recognizing caregiver. And then at 6 months, they're recognizing the difference between like caregiver versus other people. And then by a year, they know that there's a difference in terms of phenotype, so appearance of a person, but they don't really know anything else, right? There's not much knowledge around that. So I would say with my own children, it was probably closer to 2 before they started articulating, oh, there's a difference in skin, but it was all around color. So I would say
Mm,
anything, and like literally their primary colors, they're learning their colors, right? And
right.
so at one point, one parent was gray, and the next point, another person in the family was peach, and they were
Hmm.
literally just trying to figure it out based on shades of the crayons that they had, right?
Right. Right.
And I went with it. We talked about color and there's different types of color and there are different shades and all of it is beautiful ultimately, right?
Yep.
And then once you get into the like preschool, right before kindergarten, I think the conversations matured a little bit more on
So
just
like three to
noticing difference.
five.
I would say three to
Three to
five.
five.
Yes. Three to
Okay.
five.
So what happened there?
They were noticing difference. They were noticing that literally melanin, they didn't know it was melanin, right? But just like skin was presenting differently, or even ability, right? Perceived ability versus, oh, that person's in a wheelchair. What's happening? And them being curious about it, I thought was an opportunity for me to be curious with them. So starting to ask them questions, simple questions of, well, what do you think about that? What do you think might be something fun about being in this category over here? What might
Hmm.
be something, and always doing your best to not ask leading questions, but it'll happen one
Of
way or
course.
another. But just because they were curious and because they were asking questions, I wanted them to continue with that curiosity. I would say in the adolescent stage, so
Actually,
5.
I'm sorry, before you
Oh,
get
sorry.
there,
Yeah,
do you feel that you instigated the curiosity or were they naturally curious?
that's a fantastic question. They were naturally curious.
Hmm.
I waited for them to ask questions. And I will say, I will openly admit, I felt, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to have these conversations with my children, knowing that they're
Right.
picking up on it, knowing that they're seeing
Right.
it. I'm not ready yet as a grown whole person, just was not ready yet. And so I waited.
Right.
I waited to see if there was going to be some semblance of like, oh, wait, what's going on? I think an advantage to waiting and letting them lead a little bit is them feeling like it's an open environment, it's an open conversation, and trusting you as a parent to say, I can say anything, I can observe things, and they might not know everything, my parents might not know everything, but I can at least have these conversations with them.
So your kids were curious and started talking about it and asking, what if
Yeah.
your child's not as curious about it?
I suspect so many of the children out there are similar to mine that they are curious. It's about when and where they'll actually say something.
Mm.
But if you feel like you're getting to a point, especially before, let's say, kindergarten, that they haven't said anything yet, I would have I would have some questions for you in terms of who's in your community and your environment. And
Mm.
are we looking at the same person overall, right? Whether it be in your
Hmm.
neighborhood, whether it be at your place of worship, if you do worship, if you are out on doing little sports activities, if you are doing things like, I think about baby wordplay and the way that when you go to those sessions, they're reading books, whether it be at the
Hmm.
library or something organized like
Hmm.
baby wordplay, what kind of books are they exposed to,
Hmm.
right? There might be something that is very consistent, which is fine, but they might not be asking questions because they're not noticing or not seeing any difference in their world. So I would have a question for the parents in terms of what's different? What are they exposed to? What are they seeing?
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. And exposing your child a
I
little bit
think
more.
it,
Hmm.
right. And I think exposure is one of the top things, one of the
Hmm.
best gifts you can give your child.
And
Because
what happens if you do and there's still not questions asked? Are there any things at that age group before
yeah,
kindergarten that you can
yeah,
start
I think that's okay.
doing?
I think that's totally okay. If they're not asking those questions, that is totally all right. Because guess what? They're gonna get to kindergarten
They're
and there's
gonna,
gonna be the questions are gonna come. If they're not asking you before 5, that's okay. Because by the
yep.
time they hit, they are starting to perceive, they see us in our rawest form,
Hmm.
right? And by us, I don't even mean parents, I mean just society.
Hmm.
They want to know, why does this work this way? Why does it just doesn't make sense. It's not clicking. You
Right.
got to break it down for me, kind of thing. So yeah, I would be very surprised if a child wasn't coming back with questions after going into kindergarten.
Right. Okay, so let me ask you this question before we get to older kids.
Yeah.
So let's say a 5-year-old says, mommy, why is my friend's skin black and mine's white?
Hmm.
How do you support? What do you say?
What would you say to that? And I've gotten that question actually within the household. So I talk about literal skin, and I don't go into like the total science of it, right? But
Right.
I say that there's a property that's part of mama's skin, or there's something that's in someone's skin called
Hmm.
melanin. And melanin is I believe it's a hormone. Correct me if I'm incorrect, but
Yeah.
it's a hormone within your skin that reacts to the sunlight. And depending on where people lived historically, they were exposed to lots of sun, a little bit of sun, and their skin reacted accordingly. So actually, mama's skin getting darker in the sun is a protectant, right?
Mm.
And it's mama's reaction to the sun.
Mm.
In the case of my children, it tends to be, okay, now tell me about the sun and like the solar system, right?
Right.
Because this is kind of what they're learning in school, and so they kind of
Right.
run off of the topic, and I say,
Sure.
okay. But I think 5 years old and beyond, you can level of conversation will start to get more sophisticated, but I think starting at the look, there's literally a hormone in
Right.
your
There's
body.
biology here.
There's
Hmm.
biology to this,
Hmm.
right? Because they are learning that just a little bit, at least in kindergarten. It's literally something that is within my skin that is reacting
Okay.
to the environment.
Okay.
And I think that sets a good foundation for, oh, this is really interesting in terms of how skin works, right?
Right.
Or how our bodies work.
Right. So you're really teaching at that age. Here's the biology, here's the science of it.
Correct.
And so now, as we get a little bit older,
Hmm.
let's talk about those conversations.
Yeah, it becomes environmental, right?
Hmm.
So the bias that you see and might not have vocabulary for, you might hear things like the child saying, "Oh, boys are better than girls."
Right.
How do you know that? Where did that come from? I know that didn't come from my household, right? Like as a parent, I know you're going to say that
Right.
did not come from me. So how did we get here? But it's they're looking at their environments
Hmm.
for better or for worse within the classroom. And I know teachers try really, really hard, and they're phenomenal leaders, and they're guiding our children during the hours for many hours. I don't know
For
if I can do
many,
as many,
for
many, many
many.
hours. Right. But there's a hidden curriculum there. There might be a bias that the teacher doesn't even realize is there, where
Right.
boys are better than girls, right? Or maybe the
Right.
building blocks are always in a particular corner where the boys get to them first, and so therefore they're better builders than they are girls. So knowing that that's out there, there's a little bit of onus, I believe, on the parents to say, okay, where is my child just in terms of mindset at,
Hmm.
8 years old? And what are they picking up on that we've kind of become almost desensitized to, right?
Yeah.
Of those dynamics between gender, of those dynamics between race. I talked about this not too long ago of like, if they're playing particular games, you hear that they're playing something at recess and your child is always the villain. Why is that? Like you can
Right.
be curious, right, of that, but breaking down the who, what, when, and where of what's going on in their daily lives.
Mm.
And I do think talking about race helps to contribute to their critical thinking of the world around them. And so asking the questions of, well, who's the villain? Why are we playing good guys versus bad guys? Why are we playing, cops versus robbers, or whatever it might be?
Right. Right.
Tell me what that looks like. Tell me what you see. And I think asking more of those questions will help them to start to question why? Why are we doing this? What's
Right. Why are
right?
we playing good bad
It
guy?
might not
Hmm.
always empower them to change what's
Hmm.
going on at recess, but it'll start to give them an eye where they'll say, "Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's different. I'm going to
Right.
talk about that with, my parent or my guardian or somebody in my family because I
Mm.
observed something different." And I'm hoping that that will start giving them the tools to question it. If anything, if we could just get our children
Right.
to start questioning why we are doing
Hmm.
what we're doing, I think that there's so much potential for change. But
Torin,
yeah,
I love what you're saying right now. I'm sorry to interrupt. I love what you're saying
no,
because
no, no.
what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say,
Hmm.
is you're not at that age, like 6 to 8,
Hmm.
you're not getting you're helping them learn how to question, you're helping them learn how to think. You're not
Absolutely.
getting to the bottom of cops and robbers
No. Nope.
of necessarily, but you're
Nope.
helping them start to think, oh, why are we playing that? Or why am I always the cop? Or why am I always the robber? Or what's happening?
Exactly.
So you're getting them to
Exactly.
see.
Yeah. Yep. Without saying you should do X, Y, and Z, right? Because at least
Mm.
from my experience, that never goes well. But
Hmm.
the questioning the world around you, and albeit I know other people will say, "Oh gosh, that gets so annoying," or this, and that. But like, I think questions are a good thing. I think
Hmm.
challenging the norms again, that we've been desensitized to is absolutely a good thing because
Hmm.
there's so much potential for what they can do in the future. I will say it becomes a rabbit hole, right? So I took a class on racial identity in adolescence, and I could have been in that class forever and ever and ever and ever
For
because it
years, right?
for years, because it was just multiple layers of like, how you have dinner can affect the dynamic of how they perceive the world, or how you whether you breastfed or didn't breastfeed, whether it's just there's so many dynamics that can change for a child depending on what you do as a parent. But I think the one gift that you can absolutely give that will stay with them is the questioning, what, when, where, why, how of their environment.
Hmm. So as they get into tween years,
Hmm.
9, 10, 11,
Hmm.
12,
Yeah.
what's the conversation shift?
It is going to be, it's going to be more of how people perceive me. So while it might be external at facing, generally, when you're getting into those early tween years, it's going to be, going to be going into high school soon. I'm in the middle school years.
Yep.
What makes me cool? What doesn't make me cool? I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to ask questions anymore because it's not cool, right? So it's so interesting of how they become a microcosm at that age
Yep.
of adults, right? Where
Yeah.
like, I need to conform in some way. So like all this time you've been sort of question and push the boundaries and
Yes.
all of that, they are going to change. They're going to change
Hmm.
on you, and they're going to want to fall in line with whatever status
Yes.
quo they've perceived. And that I think is going to be a real challenge because I don't think that the environment and the conversation can be as open, right? They might not feel like they want to come to you and talk about this stuff. Um,
Sure.
or like difference is not a cool thing to be identifying anymore. And so therefore I don't want to talk about it. I think that is a place where you can start to insert different perspectives from like a reading standpoint. So
Yeah.
if there is a summer reading list, or if there is particular topics that are being addressed in like history or English or any of those things, for me, I think a creative way to address it is to go ahead and do like different autobiographies or different
Hmm.
perspectives, right? So you are obviously the history that we learn is very Eurocentric, right? But
Yeah.
you might want to learn from a scholar that wrote, or even not even a scholar, an autobiography of someone who's living in the time period that's going to be addressed in school. I
Hmm.
think those alternate perspectives give such an interesting learning dynamic for our
Sure.
children to be able to build a bit of confidence in difference, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And I also just think, even like beyond race, beyond identity, beyond ethnicity, beyond all of this,
Mm-hmm.
I think a very big shift in our human development and our human
Yeah.
psychology is recognizing the vast perspectives on the same thing. I
Yeah.
think that is one of the most interesting kind of shifts in our own personal development, and giving kids that opportunity to learn how differently people see things, and how uniquely people see things through different lenses.
Right. 100%. And I think that's a
Yeah.
great, phenomenal gift.
Hmm. So I want to talk about adolescence
Hmm.
and like shifting there, like post tween years and the conversation. And then I want to ask when things get difficult. So let's talk about, I mean, adolescence gets difficult, but what happens in the conversations with adolescents? Is there a
It be
shift?
Yeah, there definitely is a shift. And I think the foundation that you've created for empathy can be a really helpful to be able to know when and where to have the tough conversations. Yeah, that it becomes hard. And I'm thinking about my own children in that, in terms of how to help them feel hopeful, how to
Hmm.
help them feel like change is actually possible when it comes to race and this thing that has been pro- is projected, even the word, just it's been the intent and the impact on race is two completely different things. And I also think about having the conversation as things get tougher, right? So you want to be cool, you want to be perceived in a particular way, you're
Yep.
figuring out your identities also, that's coming into play at the same time, as you're in those tween to older
Yeah.
years. And it's how do you build the confidence and the self-love so that I think about stereotype threat, right? Being I know what perceptions are of me out there, they're not necessarily true. How do I build the confidence that I need to navigate these places
Yeah.
and not feel as driven by what they're saying or what society may have perceived as for my people or people with
Right.
my
Right.
phenotype. So I feel like I'm not quite answering the question, but what I'm getting at is the conversations are going to be tough, the empathy that you can build for both the child for themselves and for understanding that people are coming from these vast perspectives is going to help them navigate these racial moments.
And I'm actually hearing you group things. The beginning years, I'm hearing science,
Hmm.
fact.
Hmm.
The next group of years, I'm hearing curiosity
Hmm.
and critical thinking, the why.
Right.
Then I'm hearing the kind of bucket of navigating conformity
Hmm.
and kind of like self-identity. But then I'm hearing confidence. Then I'm hearing, because like as you're speaking, I'm like, okay, you know, navigating, building confidence in managing in maybe in understanding that people's perspectives of you might be different.
Hmm.
And isn't that also kind of the work of adolescence? Like
Yeah.
body type,
Yeah.
hair color,
Hmm.
race, all of
Hmm.
it. Like,
Hmm.
isn't this kind of, acne or no acne? Like, isn't this kind of
That's a huge
the
one.
work of adolescence building up enough confidence
Hmm.
that you can deal and
Right.
cope with, not deal, but cope with the things that are going to be thrown at you and the perceptions that are going to be thrown at you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's what makes
Yeah.
it so hard is like you're trying to build these small agents of change, right? I think we all
Yeah.
have great intentions of just like, oh, this is gonna happen. And then, insert child from, at school. And it's just like, oh, it all crumbled. How did this happen? And it's
Right.
just you're actively seeing society just like take
Right.
over. That
Right.
conformity piece is huge. It's
It's
huge.
huge. It's
Hmm.
huge. And it's not wrong to want it. Like, it's not wrong to want to conform. Like, this is part of the job of tweenhood, of wanting
Right.
to conform and feel what that feels like.
Right.
So it's nice. We're putting this into buckets. But then what happens? But then what happens when a child's bullied? What happens when bad
Yeah.
things happen?
Yeah.
What happens when the intentions aren't good? Like, how do you support your child through that? Or if
So
your
I would say
child's the bully?
that one is a rough one. I was gonna joke and say that's when you go into school and you have a direct conversation with the bully. But if your child is the bully, that's also there's questions that I think you're responsible as a parent to be asking, okay, what's in the environment, right? I had recently had a conversation where thinking about something as simple as what are the TV shows that we're watching, right?
Mm,
Like, am I actually inserting something unintentionally, but am I actually inserting something into the conversation that's
right.
making my child react and think in terms of like good guy, bad guy, or right and not right, or good and evil, just you might
Right.
not even realize that you're doing it, right? Same way that you might not realize that to me, I think having a diverse community, I'm committed to that, right? I want my children to see lots of different examples of just awesomeness. And you might not have done that. You might be in a very sort of
Mm,
monolithic space, and that's it. And you never thought to change that. Now, I would
right.
say if you were the bully, I would absolutely, and I'm not endorsing any particular martial arts, but if your child is ending up being the bully, I wonder if something like a jujitsu or a karate or a discipline that's going to help you understand what bullying actually is perhaps
Right.
That's an option. That could also be an option for someone who's being bullied, right? To understand the dynamics of conflict. But I think as those things come, it becomes, as those things emerge,
Hmm.
you are going to have to take a step back and understand the environment that's contributing and helping or hindering the child. And hopefully, because you've been having those open conversations with your child from the beginning, you can sit down and talk about it. And I think it is 100% okay to say, look, I don't know everything, and we're going to work through this together. And I think that happens in a lot, right? If you're not
Hmm.
studying race, if you're not looking at, journal articles regularly about
Right.
how these things shift, which is normal, that's everyday life.
Right.
You're not going to have these like theories, critical race theory, or like, you're not
Right.
going to have those tools, and that's okay. That's totally fine. I think creating opportunity to say, look, I don't know all the things about perceived difference. So let's work through this together. Let's have a cache of authors. Let's start watching shows and documentaries specifically, right? There's some fantastic ones out there to just sort of understand the why other people might be feeling the way they are. And then at the end of the day, I do think that you should play a RuPaul song and
Yep.
just understand that other people's perceptions of you are none of your business. Do you
Right.
just you start to build your bubble,
Right.
and you start to build a community and a family around you to give you the support when things are tough.
Right. Oh, I love that other people's perceptions are none of your business.
None of your
I
business,
love that.
RuPaul,
It
all
really
the way,
isn't.
all day.
Really isn't.
It isn't. It's none of your business. You go
It's,
on and do what you're supposed to do.
yeah, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I grew up in a time period where color blindness was the key term. Like that was what everyone taught, like, oh, I'm colorblind, I'm colorblind, colorblind. And
Gotta love it. It's a
yeah,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, it's interesting because I hear that term still, and I don't. Back then, I was like, oh yeah, that's a cool way to be.
Yeah,
Now it
absolutely.
just feels like a really defensive term to say. Like I don't like how can you be colorblind? Like how are we and how can you be gender blind? Like how can you be that?
Right, right. No, I exactly like not recognize. So color blindness to me is propaganda.
Yeah.
Just my opinion, right? And it, like you said, it just negates the awesomeness, the beauty of the world around you.
Yes.
And if you are colorblind or gender blind or whatever blindness you want to say, you are also blind to what is happening around you. And you're blind to the opportunities that you might have to be able to help. And you're blind to the opportunities you may have to be able to make change. So you can't walk around and be like, "Oh, I'm all about change, but I'm also colorblind." That doesn't make sense because you're not going to see what's happening to a community or what's happening to an
Right.
individual. It's just okay. It to me, it's reinforcing the structural barriers that are there, because if you can't see if somebody else is different, then like, gender norms are totally fine. Or, the racial social construct, totally fine. It's fine.
Right.
There's no fires. There's nothing bad going on, right? Nobody's struggling.
Right. Right.
Everybody has the same income, they have the
Right.
same access to opportunities. And that's just, it's an easy and, like you said, a defensive way to get out of addressing the issue. It's the
Yeah.
reason why, from my perspective, the racial reckoning will continue to happen in this country because we're not addressing it, right? We're
Right.
just sort of walking around it. We're doing the work on the fringes, and a couple people might feel good and they move up and we talk about it and we brag about them, but it's fringe work ultimately. Color
Right. It's not
blindness,
deep. Hmm.
right, right. Color blindness is just reinforcing and hiding in some ways the structural barriers that have built up and been the
Yeah.
foundation of this country.
But on that
Hmm.
note,
Hmm.
as a parent, as a person in the field that I'm in, and this is my stuff, but this
Hmm.
is an anxiety producing topic I have found.
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
I am anxious to say the wrong thing. I'm anxious
Hmm.
to do the wrong thing. I want to talk about that because I don't think I'm alone in that. I
Yeah.
don't think I'm alone in that. And like when you're talking about like fringe work is being done, not like deep, real systemic work. And I'm wondering like where do you stand on that? Is that part of why the systemic work's not happening because everyone's nervous about this? Or like
Yes.
what's going on here? And how do
Yes.
we fix that?
Right, right. So many things to fix. But I feel like because we are doing the fringe work that helps us to feel good, some of us to feel good and say, well, that's enough, right? I've done my part, I've done my piece, and that's fine. I think the
Mm,
anxiety around it is that you are going off of, not you specifically, right? But
yeah.
someone who is trying to go deeper is not going to be part of the conformity. You're breaking off now. You're off into space, right? With
Mm,
no tether, nothing keeping you or holding you. And I think about programs like a long talk, which I'll send you the link for later, but I think about the programs where they are addressing racism head on, not no chaser. There's just you're getting it straight. And I think about how they, even in this environment and in this world, they're able to find success because they're addressing it head on. I absolutely understand that there's anxiety around it. And I think that is where you, as an individual, can start to tap into your community. And you might not
mm,
think that you have a community, right? You might think like, oh, everyone kind of looks the same. Like I admittedly didn't branch out that much, but you have coworkers, you
yep.
have neighbors, you have people. And my suggestion would be, because I do this too, right? I don't know a whole lot of things, but I think back to kids being little and asking questions, right? You'll see a little kid in the grocery store, for example, and you might have the biggest zit. You know what the zit, the kid knows there's a zit. They're pointing
Yep.
at you at the
At
zit,
the
right?
say.
And then
Hmm.
the parent is trying to act like, oh no, the child didn't see it, even though they're pointing and staring right at you and asking, what is
Yes.
that on your face? I think you approach it as an adult to say, all right, there's a zit. And I don't know everything about the zit. I don't know how the thing even got there. I need help in terms of figuring and sorting it out. And there's some
Right.
anxiety around it, right? Now, I will say, not everybody is willing and sometimes able to be a teacher, right? Sometimes that is exhausting work. As a Black person,
Yep.
that is exhausting work. But if someone's coming to me and saying, look, I don't know everything, and I'm having a moment, and I'm really trying to make sure that my children know better,
Yes.
do better, whatever, you better believe if I can't do the work in the moment, I'm going to find somebody to be like, you know what, you connect with this person, or
Yep.
let's get together, let's do a play date, let's do whatever, and talk about it. Because for me, talking about it is at least the first step of how can I
Yep.
find resources? How can I start to get over my anxiety? That anxiety is going to be there. And I think lots of people have anxiety
Yeah.
around
Sure.
different topics, right? But talking about it and sorting it out and trying to come up at least with a plan can
Yep.
turn your intent, right? Thinking about it and sorting it through on your
Right.
own into actual impact for your child.
And closer to that impact
And
that you're
closer,
trying to have.
right, closer to the impact.
So and so with that, so I hear as adults, we need to ask, we need to surround ourselves, we need to ask the questions. But
Mhm.
what if we know that we messed up in something we said to our kid?
Mhm. Yeah,
How do you recommend approaching that?
that's a
Around
fantastic
race, around
around
race.
race. Yeah, no, that is fantastic. I have absolutely done that myself. And I have found myself apologizing actually to my children and saying, you know what? Mama said something that was out of turn, or mama said something that is not correct.
Hmm.
And I did a little search, or I spoke to some people and I found out that I'm not correct when it comes to X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And the trust that comes from that is huge. They say, oh wow, mama doesn't know everything, but she's going to go help me find the answer. She's going to help me in X, Y, and Z. So I've actually, and especially I grew up with the like children are seen and not heard, and there's no way
Yeah.
that you're, like my parents
Yeah.
apologizing, that was
Right.
never a thing. But for me, I wasn't right. I didn't
Yep.
get it right. And that's okay to not get it right. And that's another layer of you being able to be vulnerable and show self-empathy on some
Yep.
level, right? And being that model for your children. There's a song that Kezi likes right now of like, children will listen. And it's this
Mm,
kind of sombering song, but it's essentially what you do. Your actions are going to speak louder than your words with your
1000%.
children, right?
Hmm.
And so you're not going to get it right all the time. And that's okay.
Right.
Don't put that pressure on yourself, honestly.
Hmm.
It's how you convey the message to your children and how you walk in your confidence or your newfound information that is going to have a huge impact on them
I love that.
and on you.
And it's true. Yep, absolutely. So Teran, I know we're running out of time. If there were 5 takeaways that you wanted to give parents around these discussions and
Yeah.
around our own self-development with this, what would it be?
So number one would definitely be creating an open environment for your children to ask anything. Just that curiosity, I promise you, sometimes might be a little bit frustrating, but it's them asking questions is huge because they're thinking about their world in
Hmm.
a different way. Normalizing the conversations around differences, and that could be you're reading a book and you're looking at the characters and you're making observations, they're making observations, making that feel normal, I think
Hmm.
is huge. Sharing your own experiences and even lack thereof, right? You're talking about growing up, color blindness was a thing. That might not be a conversation that you can have with your child
Right.
right now, but in those tween years, it might be one of those things where you're like,
Sure.
look, here's a funny thing that used to happen when I was,
Right.
younger, or how we perceive the world, like as if it were
Right.
flat, right? So just sharing your own experiences, you come with a richness as a parent, as a
Hmm.
guardian, that is valid and that is just really helpful in them understanding their world. Exploring diverse media, diverse celebrations, cultural celebrations. So there's lots going on in Philadelphia. And I wonder if like you might not feel comfortable going to the Puerto Rican Day Parade. I tell you, it's a great time. You
It's a
have
great
lots
parade.
of fun.
It's a
Right,
great
exactly.
parade.
Exactly.
It's
It's
a
a
great
fantastic parade.
parade.
There's lots of things that go on at Penn's Landing I think there's
It's
Brazilian Day,
awesome.
there's just
Yep.
lots of different cultural events. You might not know anything about that culture, right?
Just
That's
go.
ethnicity, but just go. Just go.
Just go and learn. Hmm.
Yeah, it's just being open to learning, I think is a
Hmm.
fantastic model for your children. And then checking out multiple perspectives of history together. So I'm not a heavy audiobook person, but I'm becoming that as, traffic and all of the things that you
Yeah.
get caught up in life. And there's just some fantastic books out there that are giving you alternate histories, because obviously like history is written by the winner, right?
Yep.
And there's just so many things that are out there in the world that we don't know because we're coming from an American lens, or even like state history, right?
Yep.
Those sort of things are written very specifically for us. But I just feel like those multiple perspectives, the more that you know and you understand, the more you're going to be able to challenge or even accept what it is that you're hearing, and knowing that people are coming from a dynamic situation, and you're able to understand multiple perspectives.
Love that. I love that. Thank you so much for your wisdom with this. This has been a wonderful
Absolutely.
conversation. Thank you so much for
Yes,
joining us.
absolutely. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm so excited that you're having these conversations. We follow the podcast and just are so
Yay.
excited about all of the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Teran.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks for listening to Hey Kiddo. If you like what you hear, give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about Hey Kiddo at our website, hey-kiddo.com. Have a question for our experts? Email us at hello@hey-kiddo.com.